Would a Brexit resolve the issues associated with immigration? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Stephen Booth, the co-director at Open Europe, and also by Lord Green from Migration Watch UK. Thanks very much to both of you for joining us, gentlemen. Andrew Green, to you first of all. As James Brokenshire pointed out there, the largest proportion of immigration to the UK is outside the EU. What difference would leaving the EU make to migration, do you think?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that these figures are very disappointing, as the Minister himself has recognised. Secondly, the net inflow from Europe is roughly half, very nearly in fact, half the total inflow. So we face a situation where we have an inflow of 1/3 every year. And even that could be an undercount, because we looked at the population figures for Romanian and Bulgarians in Britain, and we thought that they were probably undercounting immigration from just those, from the AA, that's Eastern Europe, that they were undercounting immigration from Eastern Europe by about 50,000 a year. If we're right, and no one has challenged that, then we're looking at net migration getting close to 400,000 a year. This is just an enormous figure, huge implications for our population, which we'll no doubt come on to.
Well, as I say, those aren't official figures. But how would Britain leaving the EU make a difference to migration figures, do you think?
Well, in two ways. One is we would, if you like, reduce the risk, because there clearly is a risk that immigration from Eastern Europe will increase as we increase our national living wage. That will very likely draw in yet more people. And secondly, as far as Southern Europe is concerned, where the youth unemployment rates are astronomical, if the Eurozone get into any more trouble, then we'll find yet more people coming from Italy and Spain and so on to work in the coffee bars. So the risks, if I can call it that, of even more immigration. But to answer your specific question, what would leaving Europe, what difference would it make? It's this, that it will be open to a British government to have a regime of work permits, so that the only European migrants who were allowed to come here would be those in skilled jobs. And the majority of migrants from Europe are in low-skilled or at least low-paid jobs. And therefore, that would knock out, in our calculation, it would knock out about 100,000 a year.
OK, let's bring in Stephen Booth from Open Europe. Thanks for joining us, Stephen. The numbers, the immigration numbers, as we're seeing, they are still continuing to rise. It seems to be something that the government is unable to control. Wouldn't leaving the EU be one way of reasserting our control over these figures?
Well, yes, I think today's figures clearly are high, and I'm sure that the Leave campaign will seize on those in terms of the referendum campaign. But I think one issue that I would raise is that yes, in theory, leaving the EU potentially gives a government more tools with which to control immigration. But as we've seen today, non-EU migration still continues to outstrip EU migration, albeit by a small amount. And in theory, the government is already in control of that side of the migration equation. And clearly, it's a big challenge to get it down. And I would caution that I think just hoping that a vote to leave the EU will simply automatically mean reduced immigration, I think is just wishful thinking. There are several reasons to believe that. First of all, economically, the needs of business won't go away. There's the issue of our fiscal position, the fact that migrants come here of working age, they help contribute to the public finances, and without that we'd be looking at having to readjust spending or taxation policies, which are politically difficult decisions. And there's also the practical issue of whatever EU deal we conclude after withdrawal, if we want to seek access to the single market, the precedents of Norway and Switzerland would suggest that accepting free movement of people, as we do now, may well be part of the bargain. So I think Leave campaigners need to explain how they move those factors away, and how we could drastically reduce immigration without either some economic consequences or reducing our access to the EU market. So I think that's the issue that Leave campaigners need to explain away.
OK, Andrew Green, you're not specifically Leave campaigning, you're talking here from Migration Watch, but how would you answer that? If you were to introduce, for example, work permits, what would be the negative economic effects, as well as you see them, the positives?
Well, there are a lot of points there, but that's a good question. The fact of the matter is, if we did introduce work permits, then we would exclude the low paid, and that would be of the order of 100,000 a year. I don't think that's in any particular doubt. There would need to be a negotiation, of course, with the European Union that would enable us to have a satisfactory trade relationship with them, and also an understanding that we would only admit to Britain for work those who are skilled. There's no reason why people shouldn't come here as tourists,
sorry to interrupt, but isn't part of the problem and part of the need here in the UK is for low-skilled workers? A lot of the people who are coming here from Europe come for short periods of time, often to do temporary work and things like fruit picking, vegetable picking. There is a need for those people to come to the UK, and you're suggesting that these are the people that shouldn't come under a new work permit system.
Yes, I am, because before we went into the European Union, all these jobs that you've referred to were done by British people, and there's no reason why they shouldn't continue to be done by British workers. Furthermore, if you have a system which allows very hard-working and agreeable people to come and do your work for you at a minimum wage, well, which employer is going to say no to that? So they don't attempt to use machinery to change their working methods, to change their products. And any economist will tell you that there's a whole variety of things that can be done.
Stephen Booth, we think of countries like Australia where they have a really strict system of allowing people into their country. They do control people by the work visa system. Everybody who comes in is controlled. Can you not see the benefits of this?
Well, I think outside the EU, the UK would probably seek to try and move to such a system, probably a points-based system or work permits and so on. But I think the experience of Australia and also Canada, both countries that those who would seek to leave the EU would like to emulate, is that yes, there can be greater control in terms of the system, maybe changing the mix of nationalities and mix of skills. But the numbers of people going to those countries in the last 15 years have actually been proportionally much higher than going to the UK. And as you mentioned earlier, there is likely to still be a need for temporary labour or low-skilled labour that we currently get from Europe. And the question is, while the policies might seem a bit different and the controls might seem different, would it feel any different on the ground? Would the numbers of people actually coming be much reduced? And I think
but if the government is controlling, you say that they may need temporary work, but those temporary workers still come to Australia. They're just better controlled.
Yes, but I mean, you still see the same arguments, therefore, about putting young Australians out of work or the impact on Australian wages. So the debate that we have about immigration, the effect it has on local services, on wages and so on, I don't think that debate is going to go away if you still have numbers, no matter how they're controlled. I think there is an argument for saying that yes, outside the EU you could have greater control, and the question is how much more comfortable would people feel about that if the numbers weren't that different. I think what we also have to start thinking about is how do we manage these numbers and how do we manage immigration to make people feel more comfortable? I think a lot of the reason that people feel uncomfortable is that they feel infrastructure and housing policy and so on hasn't kept pace with the change. And we have to debate how we can change public policy to deal and manage with high levels of immigration, because I think the issue is simply not going to go away. I think that's the point I would make.
Okay. Andrew Green, you're suggesting a permit system. How would your work permit system work? What would it cost? Who would run it?
Well, it wouldn't be very difficult. It'd be very similar to what we run now for non-EU. But there's a real danger, I think.
But those numbers of people coming from outside the EU are going up at a higher rate to those coming from inside the EU. It's up 20,000 for non-EU, up 10,000 for EU in these latest figures. So that system isn't reducing the number of people who are coming into the UK from further afield, is it?
Can I come back to that in a second? Because I think it's very important not to look at this, as it were, in a vacuum about immigration. The fact of the matter is that for so long as immigration stays at the present level, our population is increasing by 500,000 every year. That's the equivalent of building a city of the size of Liverpool every year, or the size of Birmingham every 2 years. So this is not an academic debate. This is something that's going to have a huge impact on our whole society.
But now, it is academic. If you're saying that the system that should work is the system that we implement already for non-EU workers, but that system is leading to more people coming to the EU. So why do you think it would lead to fewer people coming from the EU if it was implemented for them?
Well, because your premise is not right. There has been some reduction in non-EU immigration. It went up in the last year, but there are policy measures that can be taken and need to be taken in terms of ensuring, for example, ensuring that students who come here from outside the EU in fact go home at the end of their course. That's a major factor, and there are a whole variety of things of that kind. I'm not saying it'll be dead simple, of course. I think Mr. Booth is right. Any immigration system is difficult and to run. What I am saying is that if we fail to get a grip of these numbers, there are inevitable consequences. And anyone who's thinking about this whole referendum business has to consider that as among many other factors, of course. But what we would be signing on for would be a continuing and major increase in our population for the indefinite future. And it's a question of whether the public regard that as not very important. I think most public opinion polls show that they do think it is very important.
Stephen Bush, we asked for viewers' comments when we were doing this debate. We had quite a large response. One of them said, "We are an island and cannot take the influx. The NHS can't cope now. Insurance rises through poor driving. There is a housing crisis." I mean, whether you believe that migration is causing a problem in the UK or not, there is a perception out there, and as Andrew says, it is certainly a key factor in the EU referendum. How do you think the best way is to manage the numbers?
Well, I think I agree with the previous speaker. Clearly, increased population brings with it challenges, and immigration itself brings with it challenges. I think what we should try to be debating is how we deal with those issues. How do we ensure that public services are funded to keep pace with the change, how infrastructure is funded and managed to keep pace with the change. And one of the things the UK is actually very bad at compared to other European countries, for example, is understanding exactly who's coming in and where they're going, and ensuring that local authorities and local areas are therefore best equipped to deal with the numbers. I think that's something that the UK should be doing better.
That sounds like spending more money to me, and I'm wondering where all that money is going to come from.
Well, yes. The fact is, if migrants are going to be coming to the UK, the economy will grow. It's about using that growth and using the contribution that migrants make in terms of taxes and so on to help fund the infrastructure that we would need.
That is a fair point, isn't it, Andrew? The amount of money that comes into the UK from tax and national insurance is far, far greater than the amount that's taken out of it in benefits by migrants.
No, that is absolutely false, and it's certainly false in respect of the low-paid who pay very little tax. But let me give you one example of what is involved here.
Figures, because those are figures from the Office for National Statistics, aren't they? Where are your figures saying that these are false?
It's false, yes, that low-paid workers contribute significantly to the tax revenue. They don't. They do. And if you want to go into that, I will. But what I would illustration of what is involved in terms of infrastructure. Every 4 minutes for the next 20-odd years, and indeed until immigration new migrants and their families. Now that is absolutely huge in terms of cost, in terms of environment. We just can't skate over it by suggesting, oh, there'll be some more money in the budget. There will not be anything like enough money to pay for that kind of thing.
Stephen Booth, Andrew Green disputes your figures?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, Andrew Green disputes your figures, disputes the fact that migrants bring in more in terms of tax and national insurance than they take in benefits.
Well, I think he was talking about the lower paid and lower skilled migrants. If you look at migrants in aggregate, that's something different. But I think the point that he's making is correct, that clearly this comes with big challenges. I would just, as I said very earlier in the debate, is that I'm not sure how many of these challenges are going to go away outside of the EU, in the sense that if you cannot credibly come up with a strategy to reduce immigration dramatically, a lot of these issues are going to remain. And the question is, how do we deal with them? I think that's where the debate should be had. And clearly some of the issues around housing and so on are not simply to do with immigration. They're to do with our planning policies and domestic policies as well. So immigration, I think, does help amplify and highlight some of the issues that the UK already faces. And clearly population change is going to be one of them. But I don't think this is an issue that's simply going to disappear, whether we're inside or outside of the EU.
OK, there we must leave it. Stephen Booth from Open Europe and Andrew Green from Migration Watch, thank you both very much.